The argument for... Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing really well. Today we're going to be talking about the question, should we stop reading classic novels? This is my first stab at a video essay, so please do bear with me and let me know what you think in the comments. All references and sources will be listed in the description below, and I'll link off to any relevant channels as well. A lot of this is my own opinion, and I'm by no means an expert, so let's just have a chat about this. Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you do enjoy this video, please do feel free to hit that like button and of course subscribe to my channel. Without further ado, let's get started. The classics. Classic novels, classic stories, classic authors. What makes a classic, and should we be reading them today? I got the idea for this video from an article that was in The Guardian a couple of weeks ago. So for those of you that aren't based in the UK, The Guardian is a UK newspaper, and this particular article was talking about whether or not we should be focusing on the classics and encouraging young children and young adults to read them over and above newer publications. The article was brief, as they are most of the time, but it got me to thinking, should we actually be focusing on the classics, or should we be focusing our energy on newer works of fiction? When I personally hear the phrase classics, I think of two things: that the book in question must hold some kind of cultural importance, and two, that it has a higher than average chance of being boring. At risk of being a little bit cliche, I think the best place to start with this discussion is to talk about what a classic actually is. What makes a classic? What do we mean when we say a novel has earned the right to be defined as a classic? And who ultimately decides which works make that definition? Though there is not a solid singular definition of a classic novel, it is generally accepted that a classic is a work of fiction that represents a genre or style. It is a book noted as being exemplary or noteworthy. How a work actually becomes a classic is a question that's been posed by numerous authors across numerous years and will probably never stop asking. But it is generally accepted that a classic work is to be reinterpreted and therefore remains relevant for many generations. In 1850, Charles Augustin Sainte-Beuve, I think I said that right, I have no idea, I'm sure someone can let me know in the comments, said that ancient works are classical not because they are old, but because they are powerful, fresh and healthy. Mark Van Doren simplifies this by saying that anything that remains in print should be counted as a classic. Italo Calvino, who I will quote so many times throughout this video, put it really nicely in 1980 when he said, "A classic is a book that has never finished saying what it has to say." Perhaps the most famous definition of a classic, and my personal favourite, is from Mark Twain. He said, "A classic novel is something that everybody wants to have read and nobody wants to read." Out of interest, I asked my followers over on Instagram what they thought constituted a classic novel, and actually their responses pretty much added up. They matched what the internet told me and what the scholars say. So I think it's pretty well known what a classic is. It's just not that solid a definition. The responses range from any novel that has a major impact on novels in its genre after it, age, reputation, sales figures, and whether or not Penguin decides to publish it as a classic. Which is as fair an argument as any, I think. Okay, so we've established that a classic novel is a work that stands the test of time and maintains its relevance in society today, as well as having relevance in the society it was written in. But who actually decides what novels become classics? This question was actually really hard to research. There is, again, not a solid definition or like a rule or a set of criteria that a novel has to hit to become a classic. So it's not really a case of finding a solid answer. Ultimately, it boils down to how the book is received by those who read it, and in a way where publishers decide to publish it and market it. There are a few really famous authors who seem to sit across the idea of a classic and a genre. So someone like Ian Fleming is both a crime author but also considered classic to some. Someone like Isaac Asimov is in the same boat, though obviously with sci-fi. It's simply just not that clear cut. And of course there's Penguin classics, which implies publishers themselves could well become the gatekeepers of what makes a classic work. Just popping in to say, if the lighting really drastically changes in this, it's because a very nice, very large storm cloud has just rolled over the top of my flat. So, mood lighting. So now we've established what a classic is and sort of more or less how it becomes a classic, should we be focusing our time on reading them? Are they still relevant in today's society? As with most questions, the answer to this is nuanced. So we're going to do a good old fence-sitting exercise. We'll start by looking at the arguments for removing the focus from reading classics, and then we'll take a look at the flip side. The argument for moving our focus away from classic literature generally is split into 4 parts. 1 is a lack of diversity. 2, if we are focused on the Western canon. 3. Relevance in modern society, and 4. Dense and intimidating writing style. Let's start with lack of diversity. It is quite often said that many classics come from a background with a lack of diversity. In 1909, the outgoing president of Harvard University, Charles W. Eliot, curated a famous 50-volume set of classic works. In his words, to give such knowledge of ancient and modern literature as seemed essential to the 20th century idea of a cultivated man. Of the 300 authors featured in his collection, 100% were white, and pretty much all of them were male. Authors like Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte weren't even on the list, let alone more politically active people such as W.E.B. Du Bois or Mary Wollstonecraft. Pretty clear from this that the original set of classics were not from a diverse set of backgrounds. This leads us on to the idea of the Western Canon, essentially meaning that stories sit inside the Western idea of culture and Western ideals. The idea of canon and what that actually means is absolutely massive and will almost definitely turn into its own video, but for now I will try to keep it brief. Essentially, the argument here is that classics sit comfortably inside Western values and Western ways of life, and those that do contain a more diverse cast of characters are often viewed from a colonialist lens. If the focus is almost entirely on the Western canon, then it's quite clear that any novels from inside other canons are being almost entirely ignored. Relevance in modern society. This point for me was a lot harder to boil down. Other classics, or many of them at least, too focused on past societies and therefore not the most relevant for audiences of today. Lots of the classics are from before the turn of the 20th century and hold lots of ideals and values and narratives from that particular era, so may not be particularly relevant to today. I think this point boils down to two things: how well the classic has aged and whether or not it actually matters if it's relevant. Can we honestly say that those values that existed in the time that the novel was written are still the values that we hold today? As mentioned earlier, if a novel is truly a classic, it should have the ability to transcend historical boundaries and maintain its relevance in today's and future societies. However, this might not be the case. And as subjective as this particular point is, it's hard to ignore the fact that some classics just might not be relevant today. Dense and intimidating writing style. Let's face it, for a lot of us, reading classics is just not that entertaining. The writing style can be dense, it's not always that fun to read. In the 1980s, Calvino said, "It is no use reading classics out of a sense of duty, we should only read them for love." I couldn't have said it better myself. Too many dense classics in a school curriculum, for example, could easily lead young people to becoming disinterested in reading entirely. If one of your earliest memories of reading at school comes from Heart of Darkness or Hard Times, I'm pretty sure you're going to have a certain view of the classics going forward. On the flip side, there are a lot of really compelling arguments for continuing to focus on classic literature. For this section of the video, we'll be talking about the following: historical and contextual relevance and value, how reading the classics can improve critical thinking and vocabulary, how diversity is there, you just need to look for it, and classics should be timeless. They're meant to answer questions that the human race still shares now. And of course, new books can become classics too. Historical and contextual relevance and value. When you read a classic novel, you are not just reading the ideas and the story itself, you are reading the context and the historical setting in which it was written and set. You are broadening your idea of historical periods, phrases that were coined by particular authors such as Room 101, doublethink, it's all Greek to me, all that jazz. You are broadening your general knowledge by reading works that had a marked impact on those that followed them. By reading classics, you're improving your critical thinking, and whilst we can argue that these skills can be gained from reading just about any work of fiction or non-fiction, deliberately reading novels from an era before our time gives us the ability to analyse and read between the lines. They also give us the great opportunity to expand our vocabulary. A lot of works that are modern tend to strip back language, which is not necessarily a bad thing, as it makes them more accessible. In order to expand our language, it could be good to read some classics. Sure, reading some classics might be likened to wading through treacle, but if you give them a chance and have a dictionary to hand, they can be really enjoyable. This point really reminds me of a really nice passage in this book actually, which is absolutely not a classic, but it's good, so I'm going to read it anyway. It's called The Cat Who Saved Books, if you want to look it up. And there is a quote in it that says, "Reading isn't only for pleasure or entertainment. Sometimes you need to examine the same lines deeply, read the same sentences over again. Sometimes you sit there, head in hands, only progressing at a painstakingly slow pace. And the result of all this hard work and careful study is that suddenly you're there and your field of vision expands. It's like finding a great view at the end of a long climbing trail." And I liked that, so I thought I'd read it, and it felt relevant. That, if you want to look it up, by the way, is The Cat Who Saved Books by Sosuke Natsukawa. Diversity is there, you just need to look for it. This is another point that could absolutely turn into its own video. This is such a massive discussion. Whilst many of the earliest classics do come from a very white and very male authorship, the idea of what a classic is and what it encapsulates has broadened drastically. The imprint Penguin Classics now has 2,500 works on it. That's much better than that guy from Harvard who had 300. And of course there are other publishers who have their own prints, like Vintage, that also consider their works classics. So there's a lot more out there to look through. Diversity can also be found in some of the oldest classics, we just have to work a little harder to find it. So it's more diverse characters, authors from a variety of backgrounds, nations, cultures and classes. There are works out there, we just need to take it upon ourselves to find them and shout about them. Authors like Chinua Achebe, Toni Morrison, W.E.B. Du Bois, Haruki Murakami, Alexander Dumas, Seishi Yokomitsu, to name just a few. There are also a lot of lists out there on the internet that list off some of the best diverse classics you can read, so I will leave some of those in the description below. If you have your own recommendations for some diverse classics, please do put them in the comments. I'd love to expand my own reading. True classics are timeless. For a novel to be considered a true classic, it needs to transcend historical eras. As mentioned earlier, Calvino in 1980 said, "A classic is a book that has never finished what it has to say." A classic ought to study the deepest of humanity's questions and offer answers to those problems that are relevant regardless of the decade. They can often be profound and quite often delve into life's biggest questions, something like Jekyll and Hyde, and sends the era it was written in as it's looking at mortality and what makes a human, in much the same way as Frankenstein. New books can become classics too. Just because a newer work of fiction isn't currently considered a classic, it doesn't mean it won't ever be considered a classic. There is room on the classics bookshelf for many more books. Penguin's imprint Modern Classics has just shy of 1,300 titles, and they're adding more each year. Author Henry Elliott said modern classics is the category for a novel to enter whilst it waits to see if it is worthy of becoming an all-time classic. In conclusion, I don't think we should be blanketing this topic. Feels like a bit of a washout. I don't feel like it's a solid yes or no answer. Yes, we should be continuing to focus on classics, or no, we shouldn't. But we shouldn't be saying let's get rid of them altogether. Just the same as we shouldn't be saying let's focus 100% on reading them. Nuance seems to be something we're quite quick to forget exists as a species. Some classics can still lend a really interesting insight into the world we currently live in, as well as an insight into the context and the historical setting that it was created in, whilst others might just not do that. If the real definition of a classic is what is powerful, fresh and healthy, and we can add to that list of classics as time goes on, then surely we can revoke classic status from novels that may no longer seem worthy. Penguin has removed various works from its own imprint, such as works by Benjamin Disraeli and John Aubrey, so it would probably do us good to remember that the list of classics is not static. It can change, it can grow, and it probably should. Yes, again, I think Calvino said it best, and I honestly can't sum this up in any better way than the way he put it in 1980. But just as a reminder, it is no use reading classics out of a sense of duty, we should only read them for love. Thanks for watching this week's video. I really hope you enjoyed this new format. Please do feedback, because this took ages. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Any ideas and any conversation, please do have it in the comments below, and I'll be sure to join in. What do you think of the classics? Do you have a favourite, or do you think we should stop reading them altogether? Thanks for watching. Just a reminder again, please do subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more videos like this, and I will see you later with another video. Bye!